I'm hitting record. Welcome. Nice to meet you. I'm Matt. Sorry, I shook everyone's hand, so I have to like say it now. I can't leave anyone out. I'm gonna feel bad if I do. So nice to meet you. All right. Okay, so for everyone who is this is new technology. You'll see this camera here, right? Welcome. Nice to meet you. I'm Matthew. Epic. All right. This is crazy technology, everyone. Okay, so I'm gonna put my hand up, right? You see this camera? Okay, see look, this little thing. I can do this. Oh, oh. And I'm just like completely sweeping the room, right? Like, what is this? I don't know, like now we're all the way back here, or something like that. I don't know. Technology is just, it really be doing that. So I don't know. Anyway. All right, cool. Anyways, I'll get started for real. The other people walk in. I guess I won't be able to say, nice to meet you, but hey, it is what it is. Anyways, just as a show of hands, how many people here are first year? Hands up. Okay, so like half. Second year, any second years? One, two. Oh yeah. Three. All right, third year. All right, we got a couple of those. The other day someone said fourth year plus. So I'm gonna say fourth year plus. I'm in the fourth year plus category. Yeah. All of you were in first year. After third year, it's like kind of like a mixed bag. I'm gonna be honest. We're all kind of taking different courses and whatnot, but anyways, just asking because I'm gonna do my best to try and tailor the message to based on the ratio. But anyways, welcome to my presentation. Future Techers, how you can get ahead. A little bit about me. I'm Matthew. I started at Carleton 2018. I've been here quite a long time. A little bit on that later, but in terms of my career, I'm currently a software engineer at a company called GitLab. GitLab is a platform where you can work on code with people. It's kind of like GitHub, except it's open source, stuff like that. I work on their authorization team. So anytime you do something like check a permission or you verify that someone has access to something, you're running through some code that I and my team have worked on. So that's kind of cool. Before I worked at GitLab, I worked at quite a lot of different places. I've kind of done a little bit of everything. I've worked at government. I've worked at like 4-person startups in a room. I've done some freelance. I worked at a lot of like big tech companies as well, and kind of everything in between. I'm kind of a really odd case. Basically, my story is that when COVID hit back in like 2020, so 2020, I just sort of started doing school completely part-time while doing full-time work. So I've been slowly finishing my degree, doing about one course a semester, as you can kind of see, which is why I've been here for so long. And as a consequence of that, I've kind of built up like a good number of years of work experience. So I try to share that with students I talk to and stuff like that through the various presentations we do and all that. A couple other selfish shout outs of mine. This summer, I wrote a book called Student Software Engineer. This presentation isn't exclusively about like how to get jobs, more discussing like general trends in the field right now. But I do a lot of presentations about like specifically like, okay, here's like the checklist of how you can get employed and all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for that kind of advice, this is a completely free open source website. You can kind of just read it and do whatever you'd like with it. But yeah, it's out there if you're interested. I also have a blog. My blog has a lot of stuff that might be relevant to you. I write about a lot of issues affecting students, stuff like the Carleton Quilt program, why students are struggling to find jobs, what you should put in your resume, all that fancy stuff. So, there's some content on there that might be of value to you, but yeah, feel free to check that out. And lastly, my last little selfish shout out is I also have Coffee Chat. So if you're in first year, what I usually say as advice is that I'd say like a third of the money you're putting in university is for like the courses, the knowledge, all that stuff. Another third is for the facilities, like the building you're sitting in right now, all the fancy stuff like Dunton, Nicole, all that. And then the last third is for meeting people. So, the people sitting next to you, those could be your future coworkers, your professor, that could be your thesis supervisor, et cetera, et cetera. This is an opportunity if you think I'm not insane after today, feel free to book a chat with me. It'll automatically make a Zoom call, all that. If you want like one-on-one advice, resume help, whatever it may be, it exists. So, take advantage of that. Anyways, we're gonna get started. The presentation today has 4 parts. First part is a prelude, basically why I made this presentation. Part 1 is going to be on like what's changed recently, what are all the recent trends, what are all the new tools that kind of exist out there. Part 2 is called what's going to change. So that's kind of more me hypothesizing about like the way that certain career roles could change over the next decade. And then the last part is like some advice I have on how you can stay ahead and sort of like through the lens of like, with all the new AI tools and stuff like that that kind of come out. So I'm going to kick things off with why I made this presentation. So this time last year, the CCSS, we always do like this big week of events called the Week of Awesome. Last year during that week, I gave a talk called "Why Students in Tech Are Struggling to Find Jobs." And generally speaking, I thought this was actually like I thought it was like one of my better presentations. I was like proud of, I put a lot of references in there. Like I actually did a good job getting all my sources, getting all my ducks in a row, showing all the graphs, all the fancy stuff. Okay. But I think that the sentiment it propagated was kind of a negative one. It was a bit, as the kids say, doomy. It wasn't very positive. And I felt that at the time that might have struck a chord with certain people that wasn't necessarily a good one. So my goal for this year was I want to try and create something that was a bit more uplifting, but in the same vein. At the same time, for some reason, like we've seen this huge surge in like public opinion about how the tech job market is washed and students, Gen Z is struggling to find jobs and all this. And to be quite frank, this was something that we all saw probably as early as like 2022, 2023, if you were here in university and kind of like experiencing the co-op program. And we've sort of been talking about this and speculating this for like such a long time. But I think because it's so much in like the public eye right now, everyone is already so aware of all the reasons why this is going on. Everyone is sort of aware of the the negative aspects of it, that I feel like having something that focuses more on like some of the positive things and discussing some of those channels is something that would be of more value to me. Just out of curiosity, is there anyone who hasn't seen like this quote? This is like show of hands. Anyone not seen the CEO of NVIDIA going like, "Oh, you should never learn to code" or anything like that? So like ideally you'd all put your hands up because it's like who hasn't seen this, okay? So like one or two people, I don't know, you know what I mean? This is like a really weird piece of advice because quite frankly, like code is kind of, code is important to us. We're all in like computer science, all that stuff, right? If it means anything, there's quite a lot of people who disagree with that advice. Um, but like I think what is true about it is there is a sentiment that the jobs that involve that are going to change. You probably still will need to learn how to code, but the responsibilities that are kind of associated with the positions that do code are likely going to change over time. If there's one takeaway you can have from this that should be overall positive from this talk is that, it is just by virtue of the world, right? As long as there is technology, there should be tech jobs. Someone's going to have to solve the problems, right? Like just because it all, there's some fancy AI thing doesn't mean the fancy AI thing is not going to crash at some point. So quite frankly, your path forward in CS should be a safe one. Another thing I get a lot of feedback is like, okay, well, I'm in this degree, like what is going on? Well, the job market might change, but fundamentally what you're doing in your degree, these are like timeless problems. Like a lot of the problems that are in computer science are not the problems that are being solved through the applied disciplines like software engineering. So just as an example, right? No matter what, we're always going to want to make computers faster, more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. And the courses you're going to be taking here at Carleton will focus on things like that. So Comp 402, data structures, 304, that's like analysis of algorithms. Courses like this are not focusing on like some one-off skill that like React or some applied thing. These are things that no matter how much the job market changes, we're always going to want to make things faster. So there's intrinsic value there. Or for example, there's always going to be data, right? Comp 3005 is basically a course that discusses like, okay, like how do we persist data? What is data? How do we put it on a disk? All that fancy stuff. So you could basically look at any single course that you're taking right now, and the reality is there is like intrinsic value to it, regardless of whatever is happening in the market. The truth is, like as I mentioned, it's very likely the job market is going to change, but another aspect of it is that it's kind of always been changing. So it's kind of weird that people criticize it so much. Just as like an example, quite obviously, we don't use punch cards anymore. What might be a software developer 10 years ago, maybe he was, making websites. Maybe he was making the Mars rover code or something like that. But the reality is the job that I, for example, have today did not exist when I was born. When I was born, the internet kind of looked like that, right? It was like dial-up. It wasn't really like a thing that, every single person had on their phone all the time. But nowadays, like, I don't know, the average software engineer is working on some platform that's used by like millions of people through the internet, and everyone has their fancy web infrastructure, JavaScript, all those all the fancy web services and stuff like that. What that means is just that what a software engineer is today is not what it was 10 years ago, and it's very likely that what a software engineer is in 10 years will not be the same as it is now. So it's kind of the expectation that these things will change no matter what. So it's not that problematic to get caught up in the idea that it will change, or you should be more comfortable with it because that's just kind of the virtue of the industry we're in. The goal of today's talk essentially is to hopefully show you how to somehow succeed despite the circumstance. We're going to talk about like some strategies that I've seen, you know, with all the new AI stuff. We're going to review all the kind of new tools that are out there and kind of go over them and like what they can do and like how good they actually are and stuff like that. So hopefully you can take something away from today and understand some, I don't know, something different that you didn't before this. Anyway, so part one is called What's Changed, AI, Abstractions, etc. Quite obviously, like the big elephant in the room is obviously LLMs are a big deal right now. If you're unfamiliar, there's this kind of breakthrough called transformers that it's kind of like the big thing that enabled tools like ChatGPT and all these fancy guys to exist. Just as a show of hands, I assume every single person in this room has used one of these. Participation, guys, let's go. Yeah, get those hands up. All right, everyone's got one of those. All right, so don't need to go into that, but the gist of this is, yeah, now we can finally communicate with a computer through natural language. That's cool, right? The next kind of like level of tool that probably impacts you is these like integrated, you know, like code for you type IDE tools like GitHub Copilot, Cursor. I'll just quickly show this off in case people haven't seen it, but something like Cursor, what's unique about it that's different from like a ChatGPT is with ChatGPT, you kind of have to feed it the context as you're going, right? Something like Cursor, it has, you know, the fancy autocomplete type stuff where it'll like predict the code you're gonna do. But it can also do some pretty cool stuff, like you can prompt it and it'll edit your code base directly. It can also drill down, so it can like look at your terminal, and if it sees an error, try and fix it automatically for you, which at face value might make you think like, oh, it seems to be doing quite literally my job right away, but that's really not the case. It's sort of just at the end of the day a fancy autocomplete, if that kind of makes sense. It can get you there, but it might not necessarily give you like the, you know, the most human readable code ever, if that kind of makes sense. And then lastly, there's this other kind of category of tool that I don't really know what to call them, but they're basically these ones that like will try and generate the entire app for you with one prompt. Has anyone never heard of one of these before, just out of curiosity? Like any hands? Okay, well, I'm gonna do another participation exercise, everyone. So, does anyone want to give me like their $1 billion app idea real quick? Like any thoughts? Any like, you know, anyone at all? I need some help, guys. Like I need a prompt here. I need someone to just tell me the bad app idea real quick. What's your idea?
Flashcard app.
All right, well, perfect. That's like a pretty easy one. So just to show off real quick, like the let's say we do like, I don't know, like we basically ask like something like V0 to make us a flashcard app. I'll let that kind of sit, but um, it'll basically go and eventually dump out something that we're like gives you basically the entire app, like just done all in one, right? Which again, if you're just starting out, might seem like really scary, but some things to know about this is that the code again that's generating is not like super pretty. The way I've been using tools like this is I use it as mainly like a good, you know, like prototyping tool to see like, okay, like how can I generate some UI that might fit my problem? Or another use case I've seen is I worked at a company where our product manager would try and prompt this tool to create something that looked like what our future product could look like, but the thing it's outputting is not like perfectly what you ever really want. You really have to like sit here and wait for it. The code is always on these like single files. It's not created in a way that's like human readable or maintainable, or at the very least, it's not even scalable in any way really. But anyway, we'll let that sort of go in the background. We'll come back to it in a little bit, and I'm sure we'll get a little nice flashcard app in just a second. But yeah, that's the other kind of category tool that's kind of out there. The fundamental difference here is that instead of maybe writing all the code from scratch, you were kind of in this like last category. I kind of hate the word vibe coding, but basically instead of like iteratively adding to things, what you're doing is kind of getting the most code right away and then trimming it down, which in some ways is really positive because, you know, let's say you're working in an ecosystem where you don't know the syntax, or, you know, you don't want to like finagle with this, you know, the intricate logic of like a date or something like that. Sometimes it's easier to kind of like cut back from the thing that you know sort of does work, or at the very least, you can refine the bad LLM generated code into something that is kind of human readable. What do devs think about it? Well, here, these are the like Stack Overflow results from 2014, or sorry, 2024. Generally speaking, developers all agree that we're all more efficient with it. It's basically just fancy autocomplete, right? 81% of people just agreed that it was faster. In terms of accuracy, it's kind of all over the place. No one really agrees that it's super accurate. I kind of went and tried to find all the benchmarks that, you know, I wanted to show you like a graph of like, okay, like how much better has it gotten? And I couldn't get like an amazing one, but a couple of them that you can look up on your own time. One of them is like Simple Bench, right? There's like a multiple choice test where it just compares all the models against like, how good an average human does on multiple choice. Another really cool website you can check out is LM Arena. So what LM Arena is you can put a prompt into the website and it'll run your prompt against basically every model. So you can compare how good the models are against each other. And it's sort of the website is like kind of rank them all for different categories based on prompts kind of people put into the website. This is a graph I stole from someone off the internet where I linked their thing in case you do want to check it out. You can see on here, but I can't see on here because the zoom blocking, kind of just showing a lot of the benchmarks we've been creating over time, because one of the problems we're running into is the AI keeps like beating certain benchmarks, but you have to kind of remember at the end of the day that a lot of these benchmarks are kind of like superficial. Like multiple choice as an evaluation tactic is not really like, the ultimate, like, is it better than a human or not evaluation, if that kind of makes sense. So we are seeing it like progressively get better, but it's still not better than us just yet. Let's see if that flashcard app does finish itself. So I don't know, pulling up here, this is pretty cool, but like, I don't know, in the time we were sitting there, I don't know, we got this little, I don't know, this like little app, you know what I mean? We can go in, we can create flashcards, all these forms are kind of done, you know what I mean? I don't know how good it's going to be. We can put some text in here, we can put an answer, we can add a flashcard. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, it's like something, right? But it's not perfect. It's like kind of, it's a good place to start, but like, it's not like a fully working app or anything like that. That kind of makes sense. Anyway, I'll jump back into this here. A really important thing to understand in terms of like what the models can and can't do is that models are only really as good as their data. So in terms of what matters for you as people going into the field, problem solving is going to be like a key area you need to care about. And one of the main reasons why is there's always going to be new problems, right? Some new language is going to get a version bump, or some dependency is going to change, and it's going to break something. And ultimately, all of these models have just consumed the internet to figure out how to solve things. So if there's a brand new problem and the model has not consumed data to tell you how to fix it, it will not be able to fix that problem for you, if that makes sense. So at the end of the day, one of the skills that is intrinsically going to be important is like, okay, can you as an individual drill down and solve these problems regardless of what the LLM is kind of doing? Another thing that is really important to note is that you have to communicate with these models through like natural language, right? So humans inadvertently have like a communication barrier. Like not every single person you're going to work with is a technical person. So if you're trying to communicate like in a technical language, or you're talking about like designing architecture, like the structure of your program, the average, person, your client, or like even some of the non-technical members of your team are not going to know how to generate these perfect apps if they don't know how to know the actual things it's saying back to them. So at the end of the day, there's still this need for someone who has a technical understanding to prompt and further along the process. How much better will it get? No one really knows. I got really lazy with this slide, but one thing I wanted to kind of explain is that there is sort of a sense that we are at like a point right now with at least transformers. So I don't know how many of you are kind of are like around when, or were like using every day like ChatGPT 3 versus ChatGPT 4 when they were kind of coming out. But the reason why there's kind of like an exponential difference between ChatGPT 3 and 4 is because of the parameter count. GPT-4 is just like an exponential level more than 3 because it just takes in that many more parameters. You can kind of think of an LLM like a function. So maybe you're familiar with like y equals mx plus b, where the parameter is x. Imagine a function that takes in literally hundreds of millions of parameters, if that makes sense, because 4 takes in so many more, it just can do so much more. With GPT-5, there's not really like a perfect public idea of how it works, but the gist of what we understand is that it's not actually doing more parameters. What it's doing under the hood is pointing at different trained models for specific circumstance. And that is telling that maybe we've hit a peak of how good these individual models can get with this paradigm that we've been working with. It's very likely that unless we have like some like major breakthrough, alike to the Transformers thing I kind of mentioned at the beginning, that we've kind of hit the peak of this, and that it's very likely what we're going to see going forward is like more incremental upgrades in terms of like performance, the speed at which it responds to you, et cetera, and less focus on like the actual like, oh, it's just exponentially better. It's also worth noting, to make it exponentially better, you need exponentially more data. And like, I don't know where we're going to get that data. You know what I mean? There's a lot of debate about using synthetic data and stuff like that. And there are good use cases for synthetic data, but this is not necessarily it. And I'll also say I'm not an expert on this, but These are just the general murmurs I sort of observe online. Something I also want to talk about too is that it's not just about AI. Like over time, tooling has just kind of gotten better in the development space. So just as an example, maybe people are familiar with this idea with programming languages where like kind of everything, at the end of the day is just like ones and zeros, right? Like every single thing we build is just another abstraction above, at the end of the day, some kind of like ones and zeros that sit in a computer. Python is based on C and C becomes assembly, et cetera, et cetera. But the same is kind of true of all the tools we use as software engineers. So on a daily basis, there's like basically every app, right, has a bunch of common problems. Every app needs users. Every app needs payments and billing. A lot of apps need search, file uploads, etc. And over time, like across like the past decade, we've seen more and more tools come about that sort of solve the wheel for these problems. So if you're a software engineer and you need to do payments, you just pick up this thing called Stripe, and it gives you all the APIs you need to do to charge people, charge their credit cards within your app. Let's say you need to add users to your app. You need to do authentication, authorization, etc. You pick Auth0 off the shelf and you kind of just use it. Something that has become more and more common is that now there's even more abstractions. So this one I was using the other day called Clerk is a platform built on Stripe that what it does is it just handles all enterprise user management and billing. So within like 30 minutes, I was able to build a small SaaS app that allowed me to have like organizations that have team members that charge every user based on different plans. And if those things just exist, it just overall reduces the amount of friction it actually takes to build software. It kind of is like, I don't know, graphic. You can think of it like that. Where just, more and more layers are being added. Maybe you've seen this picture too. We're building a taller tower. Let's put it that way, if that kind of makes sense. So as the tooling continues to get better, it just gets easier to build things, which it basically just means we don't need to reinvent the wheel anymore. Part two of this presentation is called What's Going to Change. So now that you kind of understand the tools, the takeaway that you should have from everything there is that overall, it's easier to write code. Like engineers can build faster than they ever have before. So one way of thinking about it is, let's say everyone believes that 20%, sorry, let's say everyone is 20% more effective with an LLM, okay? That would mean that now a team of 4 should be able to accomplish the same as a team of 5 because everyone is just that more efficient, right? And you might think at face value that means like, oh, did we just lose 20% of jobs? That's not the case. And maybe for a case like Facebook where the product is mature and you don't really need to add anything else, that might look true, right? Like, what do you really need to add to Facebook, right? It's already got the feed, it's got marketplace, it's got chats. Like, how often do you actually see a new feature added to Facebook? Or at the very least, do you really need hundreds of people to roll that feature out? So these like super large companies, like, yeah, that might be the case. But keep in mind that for really small companies, like a startup is just racing to get to market, right? If they can get more work done with the same amount of people for the same amount of money, they're going to try and get that done. Like they're competing against time. And if they have that amount of money, they're just going to pay people as the amount that it takes to get themselves to market. That kind of makes sense. So what it really means is that the cost of creating software is cheaper, and that opens up like a lot of windows. I saw this tweet that maybe you've seen this like Sam Altman tweet where he mentioned like, oh, we're entering the fast fashion era of SaaS or something like that. The idea being like, oh, if you can create software really fast, like, okay, we just you like actually just throw it away. You wouldn't need to worry about it. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I do think what could be true is that as software becomes cheaper to make, you could see a growing demand for software that meets specific use cases, and software could also be more affordable for like smaller businesses. So you've probably been around like your city. You've probably seen like lots of restaurants that have like really crappy websites, stuff like that. One of the reasons why is because they just don't have a technical background or they can't afford to have people work on those websites, right? So if software is cheaper to make, there's this growing demand where more and more people actually might be able to afford it, which in and of itself will actually create more jobs as well, if that means anything. Basically imagine like there are already like agencies today that all they do is they create, custom software for businesses, but usually they need to take on clients that are big enough to actually pay their bills. But imagine instead of an agency having like maybe like 4 or 5 products they have ongoing, they have like hundreds or possibly like thousands of smaller projects, like maybe maintaining like a bunch of little websites, and you have like a few developers who, because they can act so much quicker, can get so much more done, if that kind of makes sense. Another possible future that we could be entering is the idea that software engineers are becoming more like software operators. One idea that I don't think a lot of people understand about software engineers is that your job is a lot more than just coding. Sometimes it involves a lot of maintaining and monitoring. So, I'm sure you've all been awake on one of those days where for some reason AWS has like gone down and like everything crashes, like Spotify's not working, YouTube's not working. You're like, oh, what do I do? Someone is getting pinged. Someone is responsible for making sure that does not happen. The position of most of like that today is what's called like a site reliability engineer, someone who usually is more responsible for like infrastructure and handling those like on-call incidents, whereas like a software engineer is usually more focused on like writing code. That kind of makes sense. What you're looking at here is a picture of the Grafana dashboard for my job. So you see here like graphs that are like, oh, how many errors are we getting over time? What is the latency in our system? These indicators that like the system is or isn't kind of like performing properly. The idea is just that if software engineers, if it's easier to write code, it might mean that in the future, software engineers start to focus more on these other responsibilities instead, if that makes sense. So software engineers are usually aware of all the infrastructure around them, but because there's like sort of a need for people to be writing code, they focus a lot on that. But if code is easier to write, there's all these other technical things that are still in the same problem space that they could be doing. And if you can kind of imagine a future where there's like these layers and layers of abstractions, your job might just be verifying that like the abstractions are actually just fitting together correctly. That kind of makes sense, as opposed to necessarily, or maybe just maintain the code that feeds the abstractions into each other. What this really means is that there's probably just a greater focus on like problem solving. As we've seen, like the LLMs can generate code, but might not be able to solve the problems. And solving like a distributed tracing bug amongst like a giant system is a rather complicated thing. So it means that the jobs of the future will probably have a greater focus on making sure that you can find, like that you feel responsible and are capable of solving that kind of task. Another possibility for the future of jobs is that software engineers take on more of like a product focus. In the workplace, some of the people you might interact with on like a pretty common basis are like product managers. Usually a product manager is the person who sets like the priorities for your dev team. They try and pick like which features you should work on first that will deliver the most value to the client. They might even do things like sit in interviews with clients and kind of like understand the problems they have and like try and help them fix it. A business analyst is another title that is important. So a business analyst quite literally just like analyzes the business. When I've worked at like banks or like large enterprise situations, a lot with like money and stuff, you kind of need someone who understands like money and the economy and all that to like help tell you when you're doing something that's like right or wrong, just because you as a software engineer are not expected to be this like master of economics, if that makes sense. But the point is more, if you can kind of imagine a future where there's less code to be written, someone who has a technical background can sort of bridge the gap between the technical sort of like problem space and what the customer actually needs. If I'm working with I don't know, like an accountant, right? They don't understand all the code jargon that I use. That kind of makes sense. So if I, as a technical person, can help translate their needs and sort of like help identify the product needs that they have or that they want represented in the code, that is a positive cycle, if that makes sense. Another problem we've been kind of seeing is that tech hiring kind of needs a complete overhaul. A lot of hiring, you might be familiar with the idea of like LeetCode questions. So a lot of hiring is based on like, can you solve these weird algorithmic problems? It's not great. Basically, everyone's cheating right now because they can just generate the solutions to these problems. So it's kind of a mess. You have all these people, ChatGPT, generating their resume bullets, and then they're using LLMs to evaluate whether their resumes are good. That's obviously kind of a mess, and it's not great. So we kind of need to like overhaul that at some point, and it's probably going to change the way at which you approach getting jobs. We've seen some recent updates that like larger companies are starting to let candidates use AI, but I mean, I don't know. I think there's a couple different ways that could go, so we'll see how it turns out. But that's definitely like a big part of it. Anyways, part 3 of the presentation is called how you can get ahead. So one of the, I think like maybe if you're first, you haven't heard this yet, but like I think one of the most common piece of advice you'll kind of hear in the student community is that one of the best ways to learn is by building projects, if that kind of makes sense. And I find one of the areas that students struggle or one of the hurdles of building projects is you'll want to build something, but you really have no idea where to start. And for LLMs, this was actually kind of like a challenge because in order to build the project, you kind of need enough knowledge to know how to build it. And it kind of went vice versa. Like building projects helped you learn new things. There's kind of this gap of like, okay, like how do you really get started? And what you kind of had to do is sort of like just Google things, smash your hands against the keyboard, try and figure it out. But I think what's fundamentally different now is you really just have all the knowledge in your pocket. Like you can just sort of drill down with LLMs indefinitely, if that kind of makes sense. So, for example, let's say you wanted to learn how to get started with deep learning. You can just prompt it and say, like, okay, like what is a good first project that I can make for deep learning? And when you realize that the output makes no sense to you, you can keep going. You can say, hey, it's my first time doing this. Can you explain what this snippet of code actually does? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And it will actually give you an answer. The big problem, like what was hard for me in my position is that you never really know like what you want to learn or like what you need to learn to become employed. But now you have this sort of like agent that can help you figure out the order of what you can learn things. It can give you samples that you can run that will sort of give you a starting point, if that kind of makes sense. What that really does is it means that the amount of time it will take you all to become productive as like new software engineers or new whatever career you'd like to pursue, right? Is just lower than it would for people when I was sort of in your position, if that makes sense. So one of the aspects of that is that one of the things I see a lot is like resume projects are often like very simple from students. If that means anything. And what I would advise you to do to like stay ahead is like make sure if you are putting something on your resume, make sure it's at least like better than something that someone can generate in a couple prompts. Because at this point, if it's something that someone else can generate in like 5 minutes, you're not really adding any value to your resume. Like I see a lot of weather apps, I see a lot of to-do lists. Well, you saw that we generated that flashcard app in like 30 seconds, right? So a flashcard app is not going to cut it the same way. But although that might be a bit demoralizing, understand that it's so easy now to create something that's so much more than that, that it's accessible to do that now. The other piece of advice I would recommend is to build what I call real projects. So when I was mentioning like, okay, there's sort of this, this push towards like operating software. If you build a project and you only kind of like run it on your laptop and you don't try and share it with people, you kind of miss out on learning this separate skill set around deploying that project and running it yourself. So if you make the effort to actually deploy it and get it out there, you're teaching yourself this like sort of, I'd say, less common skill set that would just be intrinsically valued to you in the future where operating software might be a possible career path. Another thing that I think is really important is building your knowledge base. So it's true that you have kind of like indefinite access to ChatGPT, but the questions you ask ChatGPT are still going to be kind of like not good if you don't have like a foundation of the understanding of like the tech landscape at the moment. So by sort of building your knowledge base, what that will allow you to do is you'll get better and better responses over time. I find that quite a lot of students struggle with like technical communication, and it's really hard to bridge that gap. But some ways I kind of recommend doing it is trying to listen to the way other developers speak. So when I was in first year, I listened to like a lot of like conference presentations from companies. So you can go online and kind of find like how did these people build Reddit? How did these people build Slack? How did people build like Netflix or something like that? Hearing the way that those engineers talk about the projects that they've worked on will help you kind of like in the background of your brain build up this like mental vocabulary of what the rest of the tech world or how the rest of the tech world is already speaking. And when you start prompting ChatGPT with those kinds of words, and also just like in interviews or on your resume, sort of having a better idea of how to articulate yourself, that will make you look better as a candidate, if that kind of makes sense. Same thing with like technical blogs. It's not just like watching conferences. I have like the blog posts there. I like just consuming any kind of tech content that's kind of like written by people who are in the industry definitely helps. Another huge thing is like trying to find mentorship. So it's great that you can prompt like an LLM, but like ultimately someone who actually can tell you the next step, or someone who's like been down the road you're going down, who can kind of give you advice on like what to explore next, is going to definitely know how to push you in the right direction better than you kind of like asking, oh, ChatGPT, please explain this to me like I'm 5 or something like that. Just because if they've treaded down the same road as you, they know the mistakes. ChatGPT does not know you, it does not know your background. You can try and give it as much context as you can, but It's not amazing. Ways I recommend doing that, trying to meet up with your students at your university are, there's like lots of local like tech meetups in every city. So you go there and you meet some people who are working, or maybe you're working on something similar to what you're interested in, just chatting with them. They might be able to push you in the right direction. Another thing I think is really important is that now that we're kind of moving in this direction of problem solving being like the most important part of the job, is although you can Google knowledge, problem solving is a muscle. So when you're doing your assignments, you probably think like, oh, debugging is like the worst part. Really try to make the most of those opportunities, because I think that the skill of debugging and solving something on your own actually is where there's a lot of value right now. I think that what I've sort of seen in my career is all the most senior people, what kind of makes them more senior is they can solve problems faster, is how I put it. I know it sounds very simple, but I would say that you cannot learn how to debug a distributed system overnight. That's something that through like all your assignments and all your projects over time, you're going to slowly train up. Whereas, yeah, at this point, you can ask ChatGPT, how do I build this kind of app or something? But you definitely cannot sort of get it to give you this perfect idea of how to, I don't know, solve some newly discovered bug that no one's ever seen before. Anyways, that is my advice. That is my talk. Thank you for attending. Does anyone have any questions? Go for it.
Okay, state like using those certain formats, or instead we should do process. And if say like we're doing something like telecommunication, something that's kind of out of the ordinary.
I think that whether you should do LeetCode or not entirely depends on what your goal is. I actually wrote a blog post about this that you can read, where I have my opinion out there on this if you're interested. The answer I put on that blog post is just that if you want to work at one of the kinds of companies that ask LeetCode questions, you should probably do LeetCode questions. I think that the reality is, and like a lot of my managers who do hire people, what they feel is going on is just like exponentially more cheating than there used to be. So yeah, like I think that the reality is that at some point there's gonna have to be a change, but like right now people are still doing it, right? It's like today you need to, but like maybe in like 10 years we're not. You know what I mean?
Now, yes, future.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at. We don't really know the model that people are gonna take. So like I've seen some very like speculative, like I don't know, like in other industries, right? People use like where you went to school as an evaluation or whatever. They use like your, like other metrics that are kind of like even more messy than this. But I just think that like given that an LLM can literally output a LeetCode output at this point, it's kind of doomed. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna have to do something about it. Or at the very least, what you'll probably see, and like I think what a lot like what this blog post will describe is that a lot of companies have been taking like other tactics. So more creative problems, like oh, can you build this kind of app, or can you do, I don't know, like solve this, find a bug in this code base or something. Those are kinds of challenges that I've done in interviews that are less common than LeetCode questions. That makes sense. But I think you could start to see interviews take on a different evaluation tactic at some point. But I think we're only seeing the beginning of that. Like that one article I linked, I was like, it's like the first time I've seen like a larger company just go like, yeah, of course you can cheat, LOL. You know what I mean? Because a lot of the LeetCode type editors, they'll track when you like put your mouse in and out of the box. You know what I mean? Like they know when you're cheating. So I don't know. There's like flags for that at this point. So I don't know. But
Thanks.
for sure. Go for it. Yeah. I think I have a spectrum of what I think is the most valuable in terms of projects. I think the best thing you can do is create something that other people are actually using, like something that delivered value, because you actually finishing something is so much more real than like something that could have been done with like a YouTube tutorial, if that kind of makes sense. Like I go right now, I could copy something off YouTube and I could not even understand what I'm doing, but it's hard to differentiate between someone who just like prompt generated their to-do app and someone who, delivered an actual product. There's sort of this like, you like when you're studying for a test, right? That like lasts like 10%, takes like exponentially more hours. You actually build something that people are using. There's problems you're going to hit that are things you would do on the real job, right? Because on the real job, you have to actually like deploy the software. Making that like effort to build something that someone's actually using is definitely like helpful. I also think that like I kind of clown on the to-do app idea just because it's like so simple, but you could create something that just does read, write, update. It just needs to, I don't know, be a bit more complex or sound a bit more than just something that I could prompt in 30 seconds, if that makes sense. Go for it.
There's the whole like reckless like shoot 100, 300 shots, like throw your resume at every single job posting that you can to get a couple interviews. But I kind of I never hear anyone say like the actual changes they make in between these like these what do you call it, these applications that they make to make their resume maybe a little bit better or something. Because I mean, you could really have a shit resume and just not get a single job from like 400 job postings, right? Like even if you get a couple of interviews, like it's probably by luck. Like, what is there such thing as like the perfect resume? Like,
This is a complicated question because I think especially for students, it's really like with students, it's unclear. You as a student probably just want a job, right? Like at the end of the day, you just want a job, like just sort of just a Boolean.
maybe two.
I find that the thing I see in a lot of students is people don't on their resume articulate that they have the ability to fulfill the job they're applying to. So for example, let's say you want to be a data scientist, you should have like a bunch of data science stuff on your resume. Like the more diversified your resume looks, the less targeted it looks for the different roles. So for example, if you have like a lot of mixed experience, you just look maybe not as strong as someone who has like the direct experience of the role you have. I find that I look at a lot of student resumes where they have like a lot of the stuff from Carleton, they'll have like their 2401 linked list, they'll have like the 2406 project or all those kind of like put in together. When I see that, I don't really, they'll write their bullets too from like a school perspective, but not from like a what an engineering manager is like kind of looking to read. That kind of makes sense. I don't think there's like a perfect resume because ultimately like every company is different, but I do think that like the mistake I see is that people don't really try and market themselves for the job that they're actually applying to. I have one blog post. I'm not an expert for the other ones, but I've got one that's kind of like what I think for at least software engineering is like the list of things that I would try and like get on there, if that kind of makes sense. No.
Okay.
Oh,
Guess it's still going.
I don't know, but there's definitely like a list of things that at the end of the day, right? Like when students are applying to jobs, they're applying for internships. You can skills that they're actually using, right? Like at some point you do hit a point where you're actually on par with the people who are working the job. That makes sense. But there's definitely this like list of skills that like are not in school that if you had them, it would like look good if you had them. But those will entirely depend on like what you're trying to like what you want your career to be. So I have like a list for software engineering. I don't have one for like security or like data or like I don't know, game dev or anything like that, if that kind of makes sense. But there are definitely like things that you can do to help increase your chances. There are just some, some things that more companies use than others. There, like if I had the choice between like learning when I was in first year, I tried to learn PHP and that was a mistake. And he's not that many people use PHP. You know what I mean? First, I just didn't know that that was like the worst one to do. You know what I mean? So you pick like the right ones and optimize your time, picking the ones that are, maybe gate or used by the most people that might help out. But yeah, I don't know. There's not like a perfect answer for your question, but hopefully that means something. Go for it.
How would you pick soft skills and
I would say that what you should do is you should not put like a section that's called like communication skills. What you should do is you should do experiences that intrinsically show that you have to have done them. So for example, instead of like saying, I am really good at communicating, go do some volunteer work where you've like led a team of a couple people, then go, I led a 10-person team in doing this thing. Because it shows that number one, you were altruistic enough to do the volunteering, but also that you did manage 10 people, which implies that you can communicate well. That kind of makes sense. I think it's like kind of dead space to just have like, yes, I can do things in a timely way. Yes, I can communicate well, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know. Just trying to get involved, do something. Like I'm sure you're doing something on your free time where you are like actually doing that. It's just certain things look good on a resume more than others. You know what I mean? Like you probably can communicate well, but if it's like playing games with your friends, that's not like a resume level experience. What you want to do is like try and do something that paints you in a light that shows that you've, I don't know, you can actually like in a professional sense operate in some kind of team. You know, go for it.
Otherwise, why? How would you say like companies not the issue of like cybersecurity, like just in general?
So that is, I cannot give you a perfect answer to that because I feel like that's like a sort of a new problem, but I work on a very security focused team. And one of the things that our company has is like it's like a bot that tries to like do PRs for you, or something like that. I just we still manually review them, even if they're robots, right? Like at the end of the day, you know what I mean? Like a human is still looking at it. So I don't know, like every company probably has their own security process, but I'm not letting like the way our company works too is we have like we certain files are listed as like sensitive. So anything in like the off module, for example, it gets like, oh well, this team needs to look at it. So we have like sort of rules set up that flag certain teams based on like the urgency or like how sensitive some code is. So if the random AI bot tries to make a change in a sensitive area, it's gonna flag someone. You hopefully don't let the bot go ahead and do something. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I don't know if there's a perfect answer today, honestly, but those are my thoughts. Any other questions? Go for it.
Right. Oh, in the content platform called the open recording. Submit a cover letter.
I think that cover letters are one of those things where I think that some people probably don't read them. I also think that some people just look to see if you did. You know what I mean? And does your cover letter have to be like perfect? Maybe, maybe not. It's just like one of the funnels that could increase your chance, but like it's not gonna matter every time. So I think having what I personally do is I have like a generic, like a pretty short cover letter. What I do is I have like what I feel the cover letter as that my resume doesn't have is I can through the cover letter show that I am aware of what the company does. So the structure of my cover letter is usually like, this is who I am, this is why I'm applying, and I'd really like to contribute to this company's mission or something like that, if that kind of makes sense. And I just show like in that first paragraph, like, look, I know what the company is, I care about it or something like that. And your resume will not like articulate that idea on its own. So I think that is like a little bit of added value. But unless you really like, if I'm applying to like some random job, do I spend like 3 hours on my cover letter? No. If I really care about a job, then yes. But like I've definitely spoken with recruiters who go, yeah, I don't read them, but I've spoken to some that do. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like hit or miss. It's not the most important thing, but it's like one of the things you could do. It might not be the most important though. If that makes sense. Go for it.
Okay. Data assist writing, cover letter, express writing.
I sure do, but also make sure that it doesn't sound like AI because I can read a sentence and know when it's an AI sentence.
How
So,
do you know?
there's a whole Wikipedia page all about that actually. There's a Wikipedia page that like identifies all the things that are like these are the signs that someone.
Yes.
Yes, that's one of them for sure. You know what I mean? But I think that when I write too, I write with like a tone of personality to I kind of sound like a human, you know what I mean? Like I try not to write in like professionalese, like businessese or you know what I mean, one of those. I try to be like a bit more,
Casual.
yeah. Like cause you know, maybe like some crazy enterprise, whatever, wouldn't like that. But a lot of companies I apply to too are a bit more, I don't know, you've probably seen that. Like I've worked a lot more like startups and stuff like that, where there's probably like a person reading it who would appreciate that more. But you kind of got to like know your audience too. So like use your judgment on that. But I don't know. I feel like I can tell when someone's just, you know, AI generating some slop. So I don't know. Like I think with cover letters too, I think there's this idea you have to like fill a page. I don't feel like that's that important. Like I feel like you should just try and keep it like don't waste the person's time. That's subjective advice. If that makes sense. But a lot of my cover letters, really what I'm going for is it's really hard to do as a student because you don't have experience yet, but I have a bit of experience. What I do is I'm always trying to connect my current experience to what they have, if that makes sense. So, oh, hey, I've worked in developer experience. You seem to have a developer platform. I could be valuable to you, but as a student, I find a lot of students fall into the trap of just repeating what's already on their resume. Because it's already on your resume, I don't need to hear it like 4 times. You should have something there, but you don't need to like tell me your life story, like every project you've ever done or something like that. Try and keep your cover letter additive to your resume and not just like a copy paste is my advice.
No, first, by writing more casual tone, way I kind of dash stuff.
Like you kind of have to like know your like I wouldn't write casual for everyone though. Like it depends on who you're like you have to know your audience when you're doing that. So
Gotcha.
go for it. Oh, sorry. Wait, did I finish your question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
thank you.
Yeah. Right. Go for it.
Should you lie?
The answer is what does it mean to lie?
Like,
Because
Think about live, like, Ben,
yes, you should definitely bend the truth. It's a cutthroat world, and you know, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. At the end of the day, it's the interview that matters. So if you lie on your resume and you suck in the interview, doesn't matter that you lied on your resume, right? Like it's like you're not going to get the interview. You're not going to do well in the interview if you don't know what you're talking about. One of the points there, I didn't like go dig into it a lot, but I find that a lot of like the difference between like a junior developer and a senior developer, one of like the big gaps is just like the way at which you articulate yourself and like the language you use and stuff like that. It is like capability, but it's also there's like a maturity to the way you talk about technical things. I can when I talk to someone, I can tell how technically savvy they are and like how capable they are, and that's like my judgment of like oh like where you fall and how interviewers are going to evaluate you. So if you on your resume sound like you know super smart, but then in the interview you say you know you don't know some little thing, I can like immediately fish out how much you do or don't know. You know what I mean? So that's why it's really important. You even if you have ChatGPT, right, you still have to have the knowledge. It's just that you have a much easier time of aggregating the knowledge into your brain than people used to. If that kind of makes sense. Go for it.
what do projects for the purpose of learning? Do you think we recommend AI because we're learning or just kind of completely avoid AI to learn knowledge, which takes a long time? Which method do you recommend?
I think that the reality is so when you start like prompt building something, you eventually hit a point where you go, dang, I kind of need to like actually understand it to keep adding to it because eventually ChatGPT kind of like can't actually do it. You kind of hit the point where like, oh, I want to structure this over like many files, and you start kind of getting to the point where you have outgrown the LLM is perfectly giving you the next thing. At a certain level, you're gonna have to go and understand it and like start to debug line by line and all that stuff. So I think that what's really powerful about it is it gives you like a good starting point, but eventually you are gonna have to like do your own thing, if that kind of makes sense, like to, you know, make it fully work. And there's some things that it like it's not very like it's not good at everything, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, if you did like a data project, right? You still have to go get the data from somewhere. You still have to like research your data set and like maybe sort it in certain ways, clean it up in certain ways. Like, I don't know, there's steps that it can't do for you that are part of the process. So
So you're saying basically let AI do the job they can and learn to say that AI can't.
at the end of the day, I personally believe so long as you're doing something, you are learning in some way, right? I think that doing like I think that the biggest like one of the mistakes I see a lot of students fall into is just that they sort of get decision paralysis, like they're just not sure what to learn next. So like just being able to constantly move forward is like a very powerful thing for you in like today's day and age, you know?
Understand, so basically, trying to move forward to like, which only learns saying that AI can't do.
Well, I think you should like I think even if you don't understand every single line of the code, right? I work on lots of projects where I don't understand every line of code, right? You need to learn that one line of code. You can like really dig into it. You know what I mean? I think that it might that might even be a positive just because I think that you're never gonna work on some like in a real job environment, you will not understand every file or every line of code you're working with. You know what I mean? But I do think just having something working just gives you like the dopamine to keep going in some way too. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
So finishing first and trying to learn your things. AI can't do a bit. This is the first step kind of to start the whole thing.
I think just doing anything is a really positive first step. You know what I mean? Like I anything to get people out of like they can't start the project type mindset. That's like very hard. So, you know, go for it.
What's the best way to stand out if you don't have work experience?
Are you in first year? All right, what you're gonna do, okay? You're gonna try and write your resume now, and you're gonna realize it's really empty. And what you should do is you should try and like fill it with things like projects and like doing like some volunteer stuff. You want to like try just show that you are keen, you're interested, all those kinds of things. That kind of makes sense. If you want to stand out, just having like things that are more than your other classmates. You're all taking the same courses, right? Everyone's gonna put their like 2406 project on their resume. Just have something better than that. That's gonna make you look at least better than everyone who took 2406. You know what I mean? I know it sounds like really lame, but like that's like I see so many Carleton kids who just take their assignments and that's their resume. So you need to like do something more than that. That's like at least the first step. Obviously, you're competing against more than just Carleton students, but at the end of the day, it's like you can I don't know. There's steps, right? Like depends on how much time you have, how much time you can put in. I don't know. I don't know. There's like I can tell you there's like a list of things that I'd say like go learn these things, make products that use those things. You know what I mean? But those things will depend on what your goal is. If you want to do games, don't look at that list. If you want to do software, look at that list. So I don't know. Fair. Any other questions? Alrighty, well, thanks for coming. Appreciate you all coming out. Hopefully you got something out of it and yeah.